in the shadows of Silicon Valley's gleaming towers, maintained a routine that would bewilder most aspiring entrepreneurs. Each morning at 5:30 a.m., he would wake in his modest two-bedroom apartment, brew a single cup of black coffee using a $15 French press, and spend 30 minutes in complete silence before checking any electronic device. His wardrobe consisted of 7 identical black t-shirts, 3 pairs of dark jeans, and 2 pairs of minimalist sneakers. To his neighbors, he appeared to be just another tech worker scraping by in one of the world's most expensive cities. What they didn't know was that had quietly amassed a net worth exceeding $50 million by age 32, all while maintaining this deliberately unremarkable facade. His secret lay not in the pursuit of complexity, but in the strategic embrace of simplicity, a principle that himself understood when he wrote about the power of appearing ordinary while wielding extraordinary influence. The modern world has created a dangerous illusion that wealth must be displayed to be real, that success requires constant motion, and that complexity equals sophistication. This fundamental misunderstanding has led countless individuals down paths of financial destruction, chasing the appearance of prosperity rather than its substance. The psychology behind true wealth accumulation operates on principles that seem counterintuitive to our dopamine-driven, instant gratification society. Discovered this truth during his early 20s while working as a junior analyst at a prestigious investment firm. He watched his colleagues burn through 6-figure salaries on luxury cars, expensive dinners, and status-signaling purchases, only to find themselves living paycheck to paycheck despite earning more than 90% of the population. Meanwhile, he observed that the firm's most successful partners, those worth hundreds of millions, often drove modest cars, lived in comfortable but unremarkable homes, and displayed an almost ascetic approach to personal consumption. This observation led him to study what he would later term stealth wealth psychology, the deliberate cultivation of a simple exterior that conceals profound financial power. The principle operates on multiple levels, each reinforcing the others in a systematic approach to wealth building that draws heavily from Machiavellian strategic thinking. The first level involves cognitive bandwidth preservation. The human brain processes approximately 11 million bits of information per second, but can only consciously process about 40 bits. Every decision about what to wear, what to eat, or how to spend discretionary time consumes precious mental resources that could be allocated to wealth-generating activities. By systematically simplifying these decisions, individuals can redirect their cognitive capacity toward high-value problem-solving and opportunity recognition. Steve Jobs understood this principle intimately. His famous uniform of black turtlenecks, blue jeans, and New Balance sneakers wasn't a fashion statement. It was a strategic decision to eliminate decision fatigue. As he explained, he had too many important decisions to make each day to waste mental energy on clothing choices. This same principle applies to all areas of life where simplification can create mental space for wealth-building activities. The second level operates through what behavioral economists call the hedonic treadmill effect. As individuals increase their spending and lifestyle complexity, their baseline expectations rise correspondingly, requiring ever greater income to maintain the same level of satisfaction. This creates a psychological trap where increased earnings are immediately absorbed by lifestyle inflation, preventing the accumulation of investable capital. Learn to sidestep this trap entirely by maintaining artificially low lifestyle standards relative to his income. As his earnings grew from $60,000 to $600,000 annually, his personal expenses remained virtually unchanged. This created an ever-widening gap between income and expenses that could be systematically invested in appreciating assets. The third level involves strategic invisibility, the deliberate cultivation of an unremarkable public persona that provides operational advantages in both business and personal contexts. Wrote extensively about the power of being underestimated, noting that those who appear threatening are more likely to face opposition, while those who seem harmless can move freely through social and economic hierarchies. This principle manifests in numerous practical applications. When began acquiring rental properties in emerging neighborhoods, his simple appearance and modest demeanor allowed him to negotiate directly with property owners who might have been suspicious of an obviously wealthy buyer. Real estate agents consistently underestimated his purchasing power, leading to reduced competition and better deals. His simple lifestyle also meant he could comfortably live in these emerging neighborhoods while they appreciated, gaining intimate knowledge of local market dynamics that distant investors couldn't access. The psychology of stealth wealth also provides protection from both external threats and internal temptations. Wealth that remains invisible cannot become a target for theft, litigation, or social pressure. Friends and family members cannot make requests for financial assistance if they're unaware of one's true financial position. The constant social pressure to maintain appearances, to buy the larger house, the luxury car, the expensive vacation, simply doesn't exist when one's peer group assumes modest means. Perhaps most importantly, a simple lifestyle serves as a continuous reminder of one's values and priorities. Every morning when put on his identical outfit and drank his simple coffee, he reinforced his commitment to the long-term wealth-building process rather than short-term status signaling. This daily ritual served as both practical efficiency and psychological anchoring. The compound effect of these principles becomes exponentially powerful over time. While peers were spending their 20s and early 30s building impressive-looking but financially hollow lifestyles, was quietly accumulating assets that would generate passive income for decades. His simple apartment became the headquarters for a growing real estate empire. His basic car transported him to business meetings, where his unpretentious appearance often caused counterparts to reveal more information than they would to an obviously wealthy negotiator. By his early 30s, had achieved what financial planners call geographical arbitrage, on steroids, the ability to live anywhere in the world while his assets generated location-independent income. His simple lifestyle meant his personal expenses could be covered by less than 2% of his investment returns, providing enormous flexibility and security that his high-earning but high-spending peers would never achieve. The psychological foundations of this approach trace back to ancient Stoic philosophy, which studied extensively. The Stoics understood that true power comes from wanting little rather than having much. By minimizing desires and maximizing capabilities, individuals can achieve a form of practical invulnerability that protects against both external threats and internal weaknesses. Modern neuroscience has validated many of these ancient insights. Studies of brain activity show that individuals with simpler lifestyles and fewer possessions demonstrate higher levels of activity in areas associated with creativity, problem-solving, and long-term planning. The constant decision-making required by complex lifestyles literally rewires the brain for short-term, reactive thinking rather than the strategic, patient thinking required for significant wealth accumulation. The social psychology research further supports these principles. Studies consistently show that individuals who focus on intrinsic motivations, personal growth, meaningful relationships, and purposeful work report higher levels of life satisfaction than those focused on extrinsic motivations like wealth display, status signaling, and social comparison. Paradoxically, this focus on intrinsic motivations often leads to greater financial success, as it enables the long-term thinking and relationship building that drives sustainable wealth creation. The approach also demonstrates the power of what psychologists call implementation intention-specific, predetermined responses to predictable situations that eliminate the need for willpower-dependent decisions. By creating rigid systems around simple living, he removed the daily temptations that derail most wealth-building efforts. His apartment lease was automatically renewed each year. His grocery shopping followed an identical list. His investment contributions were automated and non-negotiable. This systematic approach to simplicity creates what behavioral economists term choice architecture, an environment that makes beneficial decisions automatic while making harmful decisions difficult or impossible. The wealthy individual living simply isn't constantly resisting temptation. They've designed a life where temptation rarely arises. The networking advantages of strategic simplicity extend far beyond real estate negotiations. In business contexts, individuals who appear non-threatening often gain access to information and opportunities that would be from obvious competitors. Found that his modest appearance allowed him to attend industry conferences, startup pitch events, and business networking meetings where he was consistently underestimated, and therefore trusted with sensitive information about market opportunities, competitive weaknesses, and emerging trends. This intelligence-gathering capability provided enormous advantages in both his investment decisions and business ventures. While other investors were competing for widely known opportunities, was quietly positioning himself in markets and sectors that others had dismissed or overlooked. His simple lifestyle provided the perfect cover for sophisticated market analysis and strategic positioning. The psychological resilience created by simple living also proves invaluable during market downturns and economic uncertainty. When an individual's lifestyle requires minimal maintenance, they can weather extended periods of reduced income or investment losses without panic selling or desperate measures. Rode through two major market corrections during his wealth-building phase, not only avoiding losses, but actually increasing his positions when others were forced to sell at depressed prices. This resilience stems from what psychologists call downside optionality, the ability to benefit from negative events rather than merely surviving them. By maintaining lifestyle costs far below earning potential, simple living creates enormous downside optionality. Job loss becomes an opportunity for entrepreneurial ventures. Market crashes become buying opportunities. Economic uncertainty becomes a competitive advantage over leveraged competitors. The discipline required for sustained simple living also builds what researchers call executive function, the mental capabilities required for long-term planning, goal pursuit, and impulse control. These same capabilities are essential for successful investing, business building, and wealth preservation. The daily practice of choosing simplicity over complexity literally strengthens the neural pathways required for wealth-building decisions. As wealth grew, he discovered that simple living provided psychological benefits that extended far beyond financial considerations. The absence of material complexity created space for deeper relationships, more meaningful work, and greater life satisfaction. Paradoxically, by wanting less, he found himself enjoying more, not just financially, but in every aspect of life that research shows actually contributes to human happiness and fulfillment. Part II, the Machiavellian art of strategic invisibility. The transformation in strategic thinking occurred during a seemingly routine business dinner with Thomas Way, a venture capitalist whose portfolio had generated returns that made him one of the wealthiest individuals in the Bay Area. Thomas had specifically requested the meeting at a small Vietnamese restaurant in an unremarkable strip mall, arriving in a 10-year-old Civic and wearing clothes that could have been purchased at any department store. To outside observers, the two men appeared to be middle-class professionals discussing mundane business matters over $30 meals. The reality was far different. During their 3-hour conversation, they structured a series of transactions that would ultimately be worth over $200 million, leveraging Thomas's capital and market intelligence to acquire controlling interests in 3 emerging technology companies. The restaurant's ambient noise provided perfect cover for their discussions, and their unremarkable appearance ensured that no one in the crowded establishment paid them any attention. This dinner became his introduction to what he would later recognize as the highest level of Machiavellian wealth strategy, the systematic cultivation of strategic invisibility. Thomas had learned, through decades of experience, that true wealth operates most effectively when it remains hidden from public view, regulatory attention, and competitive analysis. The principle of strategic invisibility operates on multiple dimensions simultaneously. At the most basic level, it involves the careful management of public perception to ensure that one's true financial capabilities remain unknown to all but the most essential business partners. This isn't merely about avoiding displays of wealth. It's about actively cultivating a public persona that suggests modest means while concealing extraordinary resources. Thomas had perfected this approach over 20 years of investing. His public filings showed ownership stakes that represented only a fraction of his true holdings. His real estate was held through a complex web of limited liability companies and trusts that obscured ultimate ownership. His most profitable investments were structured through offshore entities and private partnerships that fell below reporting thresholds. To anyone conducting casual research, he appeared to be a moderately successful investor with perhaps $10 million in assets. The reality was closer to $800 million. This strategic misdirection provided enormous operational advantages. Regulatory agencies focused their attention on more visible targets. Competitors consistently underestimated his capabilities and resources. Investment opportunities were presented to him at valuations that assumed limited purchasing power. Even family members and close friends remained largely unaware of the true scope of his financial position. The psychological sophistication required for sustained strategic invisibility draws directly from core insights about power and influence. Understood that the appearance of strength often invites opposition, while the appearance of weakness can provide operational freedom. The individual who seems harmless can move through social and economic structures without triggering defensive responses from competitors, regulators, or potential adversaries. Began implementing these principles systematically, starting with the establishment of what he called his operational mythology, a carefully constructed narrative about his background and capabilities that was technically accurate but strategically incomplete. He was indeed a former investment analyst who had transitioned to private investing. His apartment and lifestyle did accurately reflect his current living situation. His stated investment returns were completely truthful, though they represented only his publicly visible holdings. The key insight was that people rarely dig deeper than surface appearances, especially when those appearances confirm their existing assumptions about social and economic hierarchies. By consistently presenting himself as a modestly successful individual living within conventional means, found that others automatically filled in the gaps with assumptions that supported this narrative. This approach required meticulous attention to detail and unwavering consistency. Every aspect of his public presentation had to support the strategic narrative while avoiding outright deception. His business cards listed his real name and legitimate business contact information, but omitted titles or affiliations that might suggest significant resources. His LinkedIn profile accurately described his professional background, but downplayed the scale and success of his current activities. His social media presence, minimal by design, showed a lifestyle consistent with his apparent income level. The networking advantages of strategic invisibility proved particularly valuable in deal-making contexts. When attended business events or investment meetings, he was consistently underestimated by both competitors and potential partners. This led to several extraordinary opportunities where he was able to participate in high-value transactions, specifically because other participants assumed he had limited resources and therefore posed no threat to their own interests. One particularly profitable example involved a distressed real estate portfolio that came to market during a period of credit tightening. The selling bank was seeking a quick, cash-heavy transaction and had identified several potential buyers with obvious financial capabilities. Learned about the opportunity through his network and expressed interest, but was initially dismissed because the bank's representatives assumed he lacked the liquidity for such a large purchase. This assumption worked entirely in his favor. While the bank focused their attention on negotiating with more obvious buyers, was able to conduct detailed due diligence on the properties without competitive pressure. By the time he submitted his all-cash offer, funded through a complex structure that maintained his strategic invisibility, the other buyers had either withdrawn or become entangled in financing complications. His offer was accepted at a significant discount to the initial asking price, ultimately generating returns that exceeded 400% over the following 5 years. The legal and regulatory advantages of strategic invisibility become particularly important as wealth grows beyond certain thresholds. High-net-worth individuals face increasing scrutiny from tax authorities, regulatory agencies, and potential litigants. By maintaining a public profile that suggests modest means, many of these risks can be avoided entirely. Thomas had mastered these techniques through careful study of both legal requirements and practical enforcement patterns. He understood exactly which transactions required public disclosure and structured his activities to remain below these thresholds. His most significant holdings were distributed across multiple entities and jurisdictions in ways that were completely legal, but effectively obscured the true scale of his wealth from casual observation. This approach required sophisticated legal and accounting support, but the costs were minimal compared to the benefits. By avoiding the regulatory attention that accompanies visible wealth, Thomas could pursue investment strategies and business opportunities that would be difficult or impossible for more prominent investors. His strategic invisibility provided a form of competitive advantage that compounded over time. The social psychology of strategic invisibility operates through what researchers call confirmation bias and availability heuristic. People tend to see what they expect to see and remember information that confirms their existing beliefs. When presented himself as modestly successful, observers unconsciously gathered evidence that supported this assessment while ignoring or forgetting information that contradicted it. This psychological tendency proved particularly useful in negotiation contexts. Counterparts who assumed limited resources on part often revealed information about their own financial constraints, timeline pressures, or strategic priorities that they would never share with an obviously wealthy negotiator. This intelligence advantage frequently allowed to structure deals that addressed the counterpart's real needs while securing favorable terms for himself. The networking benefits extended beyond individual transactions to encompass entire business ecosystems. Found that his modest appearance and unassuming manner made him an attractive partner for entrepreneurs and business owners who might be intimidated by more obviously wealthy investors. He was invited into opportunities specifically because he seemed approachable and down-to-earth qualities that many successful people lose as their wealth becomes visible. These relationships often proved more valuable than the immediate transactions they enabled. Entrepreneurs who worked with during their early stages continued to bring him opportunities as their businesses grew and their networks expanded. His reputation for being easy to work with and not ego-driven became a significant competitive advantage in deal flow generation. The international applications of strategic invisibility provided additional layers of opportunity and protection. When began investing in emerging markets, his unremarkable appearance and lack of obvious wealth symbols allowed him to travel and conduct business without attracting the attention that might target more visibly wealthy foreigners. Local partners and government officials interacted with him as they would with any modestly successful business person, providing access and information that might be from obviously wealthy outsiders. This international flexibility became particularly valuable as global economic conditions shifted and opportunities emerged in unexpected locations. While other wealthy investors were constrained by their public profiles and security concerns, could quickly and quietly establish operations in new markets without triggering the defensive responses that often greet foreign investment. The technological tools available for maintaining strategic invisibility have expanded dramatically in recent years, providing new opportunities for sophisticated wealth management while remaining below public radar. Blockchain technologies, privacy-focused financial services, and international banking innovations have created new possibilities for legitimate wealth management that maintains privacy and operational flexibility. And Thomas began incorporating these tools systematically, always ensuring full compliance with applicable laws while maximizing strategic advantages. Their approach wasn't about tax avoidance or regulatory evasion. It was about maintaining the operational freedom that comes from avoiding unnecessary attention and scrutiny. The psychological discipline required for sustained strategic invisibility cannot be underestimated. It requires the continuous subordination of ego-driven impulses to strategic considerations. The desire for recognition, status signaling, and social validation must be consistently redirected toward long-term wealth-building objectives rather than short-term emotional satisfaction. This discipline becomes particularly challenging as wealth grows and the temptation to display success increases. Found that the key was developing alternative sources of satisfaction and recognition that didn't compromise his strategic position. He derived deep satisfaction from the intellectual challenges of complex deal structures, the relationships built through low-key but meaningful business partnerships, and the security and freedom that came from true financial independence. The compound effects of strategic invisibility become exponentially powerful over time. Each successful transaction that remains hidden from public view makes future opportunities more likely. Each relationship built on authentic engagement rather than wealth display becomes more valuable. Each year of maintaining operational flexibility while competitors face increasing constraints creates additional competitive advantages. As entered his second decade of wealth building, he began to understand that strategic invisibility wasn't just a tactic for accumulating wealth. It was a sustainable approach to maintaining and deploying wealth effectively over the long term. The individuals who had achieved generational wealth, he observed, were almost universally masters of strategic invisibility, regardless of how they had initially accumulated their resources. The network effects of this approach created what economists call increasing returns to scale. As more sophisticated investors adopted similar strategies, they began identifying and supporting each other, creating informal but powerful networks of strategically invisible wealth that operated parallel to more visible financial markets. These networks provided deal flow, partnership opportunities, and market intelligence that were unavailable to participants in conventional wealth management approaches. Thomas introduced to several other members of this informal network, each of whom had developed their own variations on the themes of simplicity and strategic invisibility. Despite their collective wealth of several $billion, they could gather for business meetings in completely unremarkable settings without attracting any attention or interest from outside observers. Their ability to coordinate resources and opportunities while maintaining individual strategic invisibility provided competitive advantages that conventional wealth management approaches simply couldn't match. Part III, the compound power of invisible assets. 5 years after his initial meeting with Thomas, stood in the modest kitchen of his same two-bedroom apartment, preparing his usual breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee, while reviewing reports on his phone that detailed a business empire spanning 3 continents. The contrast between his surroundings and his financial reality had grown even more pronounced, but this gap had become the source of his greatest strategic advantages. Previous evening, he had participated in a conference call with partners in Singapore, London, and Dubai to finalize the acquisition of a logistics company that would add another $47 million to his portfolio. The call had taken place while he sat on his apartment's small balcony, wearing the same type of clothes he'd worn to the corner market earlier that day. To any neighbor who might have overheard, he could have been discussing routine business matters with modest financial implications. This scenario perfectly illustrated what I'd come to understand as the compound power of invisible assets, the exponential advantages that emerge when significant wealth remains hidden while continuing to grow and generate opportunities. Unlike visible wealth, which faces increasing constraints as it becomes larger and more obvious, invisible wealth becomes more powerful precisely because it remains undetected. The mathematical implications of this principle are profound. Visible wealth faces what economists call regulatory friction and social friction that increase proportionally with size. A billionaire's investment decisions attract regulatory scrutiny, media attention, and competitive analysis that can significantly reduce returns and limit strategic options. Meanwhile, the same investment decisions made by someone who appears to be a modest investor face none of these constraints. Had learned to structure his holdings to maximize this advantage systematically. His wealth was distributed across dozens of different entities, jurisdictions, and asset classes in ways that were completely legal but effectively invisible to casual observation. Individual components might appear unremarkable, but their aggregate value and strategic coordination provided capabilities that rivaled those of major institutional investors. The real estate component of his portfolio demonstrated these principles clearly. Rather than purchasing obvious trophy properties that would signal wealth and attract attention, had systematically acquired undervalued assets in emerging neighborhoods across multiple cities. Each individual purchase appeared modest, a small apartment building here, a commercial property there. But collectively, they represented one of the largest private real estate portfolios in several metropolitan areas. This distributed approach provided multiple advantages beyond simple concealment. It allowed him to develop intimate knowledge of local market conditions that distant investors couldn't access. It created relationships with local property managers, contractors, and service providers who became sources of additional investment opportunities. It provided geographic diversification that protected against regional economic downturns. Most importantly, it allowed him to leverage local market inefficiencies that are only visible to participants who are physically present and financially capable of acting quickly. The business acquisition component of his portfolio followed similar principles. Rather than pursuing high-profile acquisition targets that would attract competitive bidding and media attention, focused on profitable but unremarkable companies that could be acquired quietly and improved through strategic investments and management changes. These businesses might include a small manufacturing company in the Midwest, a regional service business in the Southeast, or a specialized technology company serving niche markets. Each acquisition was small enough to avoid regulatory reporting requirements and unremarkable enough to escape industry attention. However, his ability to coordinate resources across his entire portfolio meant he could provide capabilities and opportunities to these businesses that would be unavailable from conventional investors. A manufacturing company might benefit from distribution relationships with his service businesses. A technology company might find new applications through partnerships with his real estate holdings. The synergies created through portfolio coordination often generated returns that exceeded those available through individual asset optimization. The financial markets component of his portfolio represented perhaps the most sophisticated application of strategic invisibility principles. Working with Thomas and other members of their informal network, had developed investment approaches that remained completely below regulatory radar while accessing opportunities typically reserved for major institutional investors. These approaches might include participating in private placement offerings through multiple smaller entities rather than a single large investment. They might involve coordinating with other strategically invisible investors to achieve collective market influence while maintaining individual anonymity. They might include developing proprietary trading algorithms that operated through distributed networks of apparently unrelated accounts. The key insight was that financial markets are largely designed around the assumption that significant capital will be concentrated in visible institutional structures. By distributing equivalent capital across invisibly coordinated individual structures, it becomes possible to achieve institutional-level capabilities while maintaining individual-level flexibility and privacy. The international dimension of invisible asset management had become increasingly important as global economic conditions shifted and new opportunities emerged in unexpected locations. Discovered that his ability to establish operations quickly and quietly in new markets provided enormous advantages over more visible investors who faced lengthy regulatory approvals and political considerations. This capability proved particularly valuable during periods of economic disruption when traditional investment approaches became constrained by regulatory uncertainty or political instability. While large institutional investors were forced to retreat from entire regions or asset classes, could maintain and even expand his operations by adjusting his strategic invisibility to match local conditions. The technological tools for managing invisible assets had evolved dramatically, creating new possibilities for sophisticated coordination while maintaining individual privacy and security. Blockchain technologies, advanced encryption methods, and distributed communication systems allowed for complex business relationships and financial transactions that left minimal digital footprints while maintaining complete legal compliance. And his network had invested heavily in developing and implementing these technologies, often funding startup companies that created privacy-focused financial tools while simultaneously becoming early users of their innovations. This approach provided both investment returns and operational capabilities that created additional competitive advantages. The human capital dimension of invisible asset management required particular attention to relationship building and talent development. Because traditional recruiting and compensation approaches would compromise strategic invisibility, had developed alternative methods for identifying and engaging high-capability individuals who could contribute to his various enterprises. These methods might include identifying talented individuals within his existing network who were seeking new opportunities or challenges. They might involve creating attractive but unobtrusive compensation structures that provided significant financial incentives without requiring public disclosure. They might include developing talent through educational partnerships or consulting relationships that created mutual value while maintaining strategic flexibility. The key was recognizing that many highly capable individuals prefer environments that offer meaningful work, fair compensation, and operational freedom over traditional corporate hierarchies, with their associated politics and constraints. By providing these environments through his various enterprises, could attract and retain talent that might be unavailable to more conventional organizations. The compound effects of invisible asset coordination had begun creating what economists call network effects and ecosystem advantages. As the various components of his portfolio matured and began generating significant cash flows, these resources could be redeployed into new opportunities with increasing speed and sophistication. A successful real estate investment might generate capital that could be immediately deployed into a business acquisition opportunity. A profitable business might identify supply chain optimization opportunities that could be addressed through real estate investments. Financial market gains might provide the resources needed to pursue larger and more complex transactions across all asset classes. This internal capital recycling created a powerful flywheel effect where each successful investment made future investments more likely to succeed. The strategic invisibility that concealed individual components also concealed the aggregate coordination that made this flywheel possible, preventing competitors from understanding or replicating the approach. The risk management advantages of invisible asset distribution proved particularly important during periods of market volatility and economic uncertainty. When economic conditions deteriorated in specific regions or asset classes, could quickly adjust his exposure while maintaining overall portfolio stability. The invisibility of his holdings meant he could make these adjustments without creating market signals that might impact asset values or attract unwanted attention. This flexibility became crucial during several market disruptions that occurred during his wealth-building period. While other investors faced forced liquidations or were trapped in illiquid positions, could systematically rebalance his portfolio to take advantage of dislocated markets and distressed opportunities. The generational wealth implications of invisible asset management extend far beyond simple wealth preservation to encompass sustainable wealth transfer and family legacy considerations. Because invisible assets can be structured to avoid many of the constraints and costs associated with visible wealth transfer, they provide superior mechanisms for creating lasting family financial security. Had begun implementing these structures even though he had not yet started a family, recognizing that the tax and legal advantages of early planning would compound over decades. His approach involved creating multiple layers of trusts, foundations, and business entities that could provide for future generations, while maintaining the strategic invisibility that had enabled their creation. The social impact potential of invisible wealth coordination had become increasingly apparent as capabilities and resources grew. Traditional philanthropic approaches often require high visibility and public recognition that would compromise strategic invisibility. However, invisible assets could be deployed for social impact through alternative structures that maintained privacy while creating significant positive outcomes. These approaches might include funding social enterprises through business investments that generated both financial returns and community benefits. They might involve supporting educational institutions or research organizations through anonymous contributions or indirect business relationships. They might include developing real estate projects that provided affordable housing or community services while generating appropriate investment returns. The key insight was that invisible wealth could often achieve greater social impact precisely because it avoided the overhead, politics, and inefficiencies associated with traditional philanthropic structures. By aligning social objectives with business objectives, it became possible to create sustainable positive outcomes that didn't depend on continued charitable giving. The psychological evolution required for managing invisible assets effectively represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of this approach. The natural human tendencies towards status signaling, social recognition, and ego satisfaction must be continuously redirected toward long-term strategic objectives rather than short-term emotional rewards. Found that this psychological development actually enhanced his overall life satisfaction rather than diminishing it. The security and freedom that came from true financial independence provided deeper satisfaction than any material display could offer. The intellectual challenges of managing complex, invisible asset structures provided more engagement than conventional wealth management approaches. The relationships built through authentic business partnerships offered more meaning than social connections based on wealth display. As approached his 40th birthday, he reflected on the transformation that had occurred since his early decision to embrace simplicity and strategic invisibility. His net worth had grown to exceed $300 million, but his daily life remained remarkably similar to what it had been 15 years earlier. The same modest apartment, the same simple routines, the same unremarkable appearance to outside observers. The difference lay not in external circumstances, but in the invisible infrastructure of assets relationships, and capabilities that had grown around him. This infrastructure provided security, opportunity, and influence that exceeded what many visibly wealthy individuals could access, while maintaining the flexibility and privacy that made sustainable wealth management possible. The network of strategically invisible investors that had formed around Thomas's initial introductions had grown to include individuals whose collective resources could influence entire markets and industries while remaining completely hidden from public view. Their ability to coordinate resources while maintaining individual anonymity had created new possibilities for both wealth generation and social impact that conventional approaches couldn't match. Understood that he had discovered not just a wealth-building strategy, but a fundamentally different approach to power and influence in modern society. The principles of simplicity and strategic invisibility that had initially seemed like tactical considerations had evolved into a comprehensive framework for sustainable wealth creation and deployment. The future possibilities created by this approach seemed limitless. As global economic conditions continued to evolve and new technologies emerged, the advantages of invisible asset coordination would likely increase rather than diminish. The individuals who mastered these approaches would be positioned to capitalize on opportunities and navigate challenges that would be impossible for more visible and constrained competitors. Standing in his simple kitchen, reviewing reports that detailed a business empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, smiled at the perfect contradiction his life had become. He had achieved extraordinary wealth by refusing to appear wealthy, gained immense power by seeming powerless, and created lasting security by maintaining the appearance of modesty. The ancient wisdom that had articulated centuries earlier had proven perfectly applicable to modern wealth creation. True power reveals itself not through display, but through results, and the greatest victories are often those that remain invisible to outside observers. The hidden power of a simple life in creating extreme riches lay not in any single technique or strategy, but in the systematic application of counterintuitive principles that compound over time. By embracing simplicity, cultivating strategic invisibility, and coordinating invisible assets, it becomes possible to achieve financial capabilities that exceed those of much more visible and apparently successful individuals. The key is recognizing that true wealth operates most effectively when it remains hidden, growing quietly in the shadows, while others pursue the appearance of success rather than its substance.